listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me, non-judgmental talk about infidelity with Dr. Marie Murphy. If you're looking for new perspectives on complicated relationship issues, you've come to the right place.
Days go by, they're crawling by.
Hi, everyone. I am Dr. Marie Murphy. I'm a relationship coach, and I specialize in helping people who are cheating on their partners to deal with their feelings, clarify what they want, and make decisions about what they're going to do. So if you're in a situation that involves infidelity and you would like my help sorting it out, let's work together. You can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. All right. The title of today's episode is Choosing to Leave a Good Enough Marriage for Your Affair Partner. And really, what today's episode is about is choosing to leave a marriage or a partnership, a romantic partnership that is really good in some respects, so that you can open yourself up to experiences that are not available to you within the context of your marriage or your committed relationship. And I'm pointing this out for a couple of reasons. And the first one is that, sometimes people have a hard time leaving a marriage or a committed relationship that's very good, even if they aren't having an affair. And if that's your situation, this episode will definitely apply to you too. The other thing is there's this piece of conventional wisdom out there that holds that you shouldn't leave a marriage for an affair partner. The idea is that if you're married or you're in a committed relationship and you're having an affair, you shouldn't leave the marriage or the relationship because you want to start up a relationship with your affair partner. The idea is that you should leave your marriage because you want to leave your marriage. And then whatever happens with you and your affair partner is just icing on the cake. And I understand why people say this. I understand why this is often the advice that's given. And I think it speaks to something important. Choosing to leave a marriage solely because you have met someone who is, amazing and wonderful and so much more exciting than your spouse has the potential to use the most highly technical terms possible, kind of a hot mess. And there are a lot of different reasons for this, a lot of different reasons why leaving a marriage or a relationship exclusively for an affair partner can be kind of complicated. But here's the rub. Here's where this advice hits its limits. If you are in a situation where you're married or in a committed relationship and you care about that relationship, but you've also met someone new and wonderful, and you're trying to figure out what to do about all this, it can be very hard in practice to perfectly delineate between all the things, right? If you're in this situation, you know exactly what I'm talking about. The advice not to leave your marriage for your affair partner kind of implies that it's possible for decisions to be made in some kind of a vacuum, or that you can somehow remove yourself mentally or otherwise from your affair in order to make a decision about your marriage that doesn't have anything to do with your affair. Now, again, I think this advice is well-intentioned, but I don't think it's terribly practical. Many decisions in life cannot be made in a vacuum. If you love your spouse and you love your affair partner, albeit perhaps in different ways, you may find it pretty hard to simply put the genie back in the bottle and stop loving one or both of them and make your decision from there. If you've met someone who you're really excited about, it may be pretty impossible for you to evaluate your marriage without taking anything related to your affair or your affair partner or who you have become as a result of being engaged in that relationship into account when you're trying to make a decision. And I don't think that has to be a problem. Often, folks I work with who are married or partnered and are cheating get really focused on figuring out how to completely disassociate themselves from their affair partner or get some space from their spouse or even try to do both things so that they can make a clear decision about what they want to do about their relationships. And sometimes a little bit of physical distance can be really helpful. A little less contact can be really helpful, or a lot less contact can be really helpful. But this gets pretty complicated in practice for a lot of reasons that I'm not going to fully elaborate. And well, just for example, one thing that often happens is people will say, okay, I'm not going to talk to my affair partner for a month, and that will work for approximately like an hour, right? And then they'll start texting again, and it's like, oh, I miss you, I can't live without you, all those things. And there's a lot we can say about that, but the most important thing is it's your thinking that matters the most. It's your thinking about your situation that matters the most. It's not the actual circumstances of your situation that dictate your thinking. So your thinking is not determined by your physical proximity to your affair partner or how often you see them. Not completely anyway, right? We have the capacity, we have the option to sort out our thinking no matter what is going on in our lives. Yes, it may be helpful to eliminate distractions. It may be helpful to eliminate unnecessary things so that we can focus more effectively. But so often we think that we have to make drastic changes in our life circumstances in order to change our thinking, but that does not have to be the case. You do not have to stop seeing your affair partner in order to think differently about your affair partner. Okay. And just to riff off of the second to last thing I said, when we're able to change our thinking, we are usually better able to change our circumstances. So we tend to think that we have to change our circumstances to change our thinking, but it usually works far better when we approach it from the other way around. And this is one of the things that coaching can be tremendously helpful with. If you're listening to me and you're like, God, I have no idea how I would even begin to do that. There's a good reason for that. Nobody teaches us how to do that. And that's why it can be so helpful to have a coach. This is the kind of thing I help my clients with to great benefit. So in order to help you get your thoughts in order, if you are trying to figure out whether you want to leave your quote unquote good enough marriage or not, is this: what is it most important to me to experience in my life at this time? And this question applies whether you have an affair partner in the picture or not, right? And a follow-up question to ask yourself is, are there things that are essential to me right now that are not options for me within the context of my marriage or my committed relationship? So I'll just repeat those two questions again. The first one is, what is it most important to me to experience at this time in my life? And the second is, are there things that are essential to me right now that are not options for me within the context of my marriage or my committed relationship? Now, notice that I'm not asking you how good or bad your marriage is. Notice that I'm not asking you what you love about your marriage and what you don't love about your marriage. Notice that I'm not asking you what you think you're going to want in 10 years, right? Those may be important questions, but the question I'm asking you right now is, what is it most important for you to experience at this point in your life? Here's why I want you to think about this. Deciding whether or not you want to leave your marriage may require you to choose between multiple good things, perhaps even multiple very good things. It may be that there are a lot of things you really appreciate and love and cherish about your marriage. And it may also be true that there are things about your marriage that you don't want to continue to experience, or things that you really want that are not possible for you if you continue to stay married. So, for example, you may think your spouse is a great person and a great friend and a wonderful co-parent, and you may really like sharing a home with them and sharing your day-to-day life with them. But having a full-fledged, above-board romantic relationship with your affair partner may not be an option within the context of your marriage. And if you really want to have that kind of a relationship with your affair partner, that presents you with a conflict. And in order to move forward in that hypothetical situation, you will have to choose between two things you like a lot. You may have to relinquish something that you really appreciate and value and love in order to get something that you appreciate and value and want even more. And for some people, this seems like a problem. We sometimes think that having to choose between two good things is somehow bad. And I think the problem a lot of people have is giving themselves permission to say no to something that's okay, or perhaps even pretty good or very good. But what if it is okay to say no to something good? Because doing so will open us up to something that we want even more. What if sometimes, in order to experience things we really want, we have to relinquish options and experiences that might be pretty great in some respects, but simply are not as fundamentally aligned with our deepest desires and highest priorities? And this is where I see a lot of people getting stuck. A lot of people think that it's somehow bad to leave a marriage that isn't completely terrible and awful. A lot of people think that if they're going to end their marriage needs to be objectively, verifiably terrible in order for their decision to leave to be okay, as if there is such a thing as objectively, verifiably terrible. And, this sort of thinking is completely understandable because it's supported by so many of the common messages that are out there about marriage and divorce. We tend to think that marriage is good and divorce is bad. We tend to think that marriage is forever and it's supposed to be that way. And that's the whole point of getting married. Till death do us part, all that stuff. And I'm not saying that any of those ideas are necessarily bad. I'm not making fun of any of this. The point that I'm making right now is simply that these ideas are really prevalent. And for some of us, they're very powerful. And this can be true even when we know intellectually that we can get divorced and that other people get divorced and that it's okay. And what this means for you, if you're grappling with this question of whether or not you want to leave your marriage, is that you may feel really stymied. You may feel stuck between the belief that marriage is supposed to be forever and this understanding that if you stay in your marriage, you're not going to get to experience some things that you really want to experience. So, this is one of these wonderful human challenges that we get to grapple with in the journey of the lifetime. And in order to make this sort of challenge hopefully a little bit more manageable for you, a little bit more approachable for you, is to emphasize that in order to make a decision between something good and something even better, you will, number one, need to get really clear about what you want in your life and in your romantic relationships and why you want it. And number two, you will also need to recognize that in order to get what you want, you may have to give up other things that you appreciate and value. And you may have some feelings associated with that are not comfortable. And that brings me finally to point number three. You will need to be prepared for the possibility that even if getting what you want is totally possible, that does not mean that it will be entirely comfortable or easy. It will not necessarily be like this smooth, magical road to bliss. It may be totally worth it on the whole, but that doesn't mean that it will instantly be easy and fun and great and be like sunshine and magic and rainbows and like donuts and cocaine and puppies and unicorns and all that stuff, right? Or whatever your poison is. In order to illustrate what I'm talking about and to show you how they can play out in life, I'm going to tell you a story from my own life. It doesn't have anything to do with infidelity. So if you're hoping for a sordid story from my romantic past, I'm sorry, that's not what this is about, but I think it's still a really good story. And it is extremely relevant to the points that I'm making today. So when I was in my early 20s, I served in the Peace Corps in Zambia. And I made the decision to apply to the Peace Corps for very specific personal and professional reasons that I felt great about. And I could tell you all about what those reasons were, but I'm not going to do that because the main point that I really want to make today is that in that moment in my life, I was as certain as I could possibly be that serving in the Peace Corps was an experience I definitely wanted to have. Okay. And I was sure that I wanted to do it then at that particular moment in my life. And I had definite reasons for that too. And one of them was that I was very aware of the fact that I really liked my life at home at that time. And it would have been very, very easy for me to say, you know what? I'll just delay this for a year. I'm really happy right now. And I just want to ride this wave for a little bit longer. I don't want to give up what I've got. So I'll just wait until next year to go. I can always defer my application. Right? I was living in San Francisco at the time. And I've lived in San Francisco on and off for a while now. And, at that moment, I was probably more in love with the city than I ever was before and ever have been since, right? Which is a magical feeling. And I had a job that I really, really liked. I had colleagues I really liked. I had professional mentors who I cared about and respected and who were deeply invested in me. I had a romantic relationship that I really liked. I had good friends. I had hobbies. I did volunteer work that I cared about. I lived in a great apartment. I mean, it was a great moment in my life. And it was very, very clear to me that I could so easily just stay where I was and continue to enjoy my extremely satisfying life. But I decided on purpose that that was not going to happen. I decided on purpose that I was not going to delay the possibility of Peace Corps service because I was so clear on why I wanted to serve. And I didn't want to potentially waver from my decision or put it off for so long that I just didn't go. Right. But, oh my God. But that does not mean that it was easy for me to actually go. As my departure date grew near, I was excited about embarking upon this adventure that I really wanted, but I was also fiercely sad. And I mean, like crying for hours out of every day sad. I was so very sad to be relinquishing the aspects of my life that I was leaving behind and all of the things that I loved that I was, effectively opting out of and just saying, this is amazing and I'm going to give it up. And all of the emotions that I was experiencing then were intense. And as I've been preparing this podcast episode and revisiting all of these memories, I will tell you, I have been hit by the force of these emotions all over again, and reliving all of that has been really quite something. Leaving for Zambia was quite a moment in time for me. Even though I was choosing to let go of my great life for reasons that I was totally certain of, that did not make the letting go easy or painless at all. Far from it. And, there's so much, I could get into all the gory details of just how difficult it was and like the moments of like crying on Muni and like things like this. But Muni is public transportation in San Francisco. But that's not the point. The point is we can summarize this by saying like it was excruciating. It was hard to give up all those things that I loved. And then once the Peace Corps adventure itself began, it wasn't like everything was like amazing and fun and great and rewarding and exciting all of a sudden. It was a stark new beginning. And there was so much new stuff to get used to, in addition to also missing everything I'd left behind. So it wasn't like I was instantly rewarded for my bravery and fortitude and commitment to my decision by getting to automatically transition into like warm, fuzzy awesomeness, amazing newness and stuff. No, the way it worked, the way it used to be with the Peace Corps was that when you started your service, you would go to Washington, D.C. for a couple of days for some bureaucratic shots. And so they can give you like 10 million vaccines in a day and you can pass out in front of all your new friends like I did. And you meet the cohort of volunteers that you would be serving with, and you do some like basic intro training things, I guess. I can't remember. This was more than 20 years ago. And then They put you on the plane and you fly off to your new host country. And then there you are, like in this totally foreign place. And you move in with a local host family for the duration of your pre-service training. So it's a lot of stuff to take in all at once, right? And then just as soon as you've started to settle into your pre-service training world and you've developed a deep love for your host family and for the training staff and for your fellow volunteers, your pre-service training ends. And then you're taken off to a village you've never seen before or been to before, which will be your home for the 2 years of your service. Or at least that's how it worked when I was in Zambia. I'm sure it's different in other countries, and I'm sure it's changed in Zambia over time. But the way things were set up during my service was this moment of getting dropped off at your site, at your village, was a big transition point. And my particular experience of getting dropped off in my village was different from the experience a lot of other volunteers in Zambia had at the time. Most volunteers got to go to a regional Peace Corps house after the end of pre-service training. And they'd hang out there for a few days with other volunteers and they'd go shopping for the stuff they'd need for life in the village. And they would put their Peace Corps issued bikes together with a bunch of other people around to help them out. And then maybe a whole crew of volunteers or a handful of volunteers would take them to their village and help them get settled in before they just like left you to be by yourself in your village and to begin your service, right? So in other words, for a lot of volunteers, it was a gradual transition from pre-service training to the village with some support from friends or at least fellow Peace Corps volunteers along the way. Well, for various reasons, most of which had to do with where I was going to be stationed in the country, it did not work out that way for me at all. The process by which I was dropped off at my village was very unique and very abrupt. And that was hard. Oh my God. Thinking about this is excruciating, people, I tell you. But what made things even harder than my abrupt drop off was that the family that I lived closest to in the village, my next door neighbors, who in theory would have been like my host family, did not exactly give me a warm reception. And so even though I had all of these people right next door to me who were very curious about me and what I was up to at every single second, our relationship was a little strained from the start. Ironically, from moment zero in my new home, I had both no privacy and no real company, which was deeply unpleasant. So here I am, like there I was, I should say. I was dropped off in my new mud hut with the various supplies I'd bought, like pots and pans and all that kind of stuff. And, the belongings I'd brought from home. And most importantly, a bike in a box that had not yet been put together. Since we were all stationed in rural villages, the Peace Corps gave us bikes to get around. And that was great, except that upon my arrival to my village, mine was not assembled yet. Now, this may be hard to believe in the year 2021, but this was in the year 2000. And at the time, I did not have a cell phone. I did not have a computer. I did not have a landline anywhere near me. And when I got to my village, I did not even have a post office box established in the nearest town. Now I think volunteers have like some sort of like internet access even in their villages, which blows my mind. But at the time when I lived in Zambia, there wasn't even an internet cafe in the town nearest to me. But when I first got to my village, that did not matter at all because I needed my bike to get to town and my bike was still in a bunch of pieces. Nor were there any volunteers within biking distance of my village who could have come to visit me on their bike. So in other words, when I first arrived in the village, I did not have any way to make contact with anyone outside of the village. It was just me and my new environment and my new people. Now, as you might imagine, based on what I've said thus far, that first week by myself in my village was hard. There were so many difficult aspects of the experience. I will tell you just a few of them. For one thing, the house I was placed in was old and kind of falling apart. Houses in villages in Zambia are typically made from mud bricks with thatched roofs. Sometimes there's cement involved, sometimes there isn't. And my house was made from wood and mud. And moreover, it hadn't, which, you can keep a mud hut pretty clean, but my house had not been clean prior to my arrival. And it was infested with various critters. And that was not awesome, right? I had adapted to critters and stuff by that point in Zambia, to at least to an extent. But still, when they're in your house and they're crawling up inside your mosquito net, it's not amazing. And in addition to that, there's all this logistical stuff involved in getting used to living by yourself without running water or electricity. During training, my host family took care of, well, did we have electricity? I don't remember. Anyway, during pre-service training, you have a host family that's helping you do all these things. But there I was in my village and nobody was helping me. There was a well very close to me by local standards, but when you're hauling your own water and washing your own dishes and washing your own clothes and heating your own bath water and purifying your own drinking water from well water for the first time, it really helps to have someone help you out, or at least to show you a few helpful tricks. But my nearest neighbors, my non-host family, didn't do that. They just stood around and stared at me as I fumbled around and made an ass out of myself, right? Now, just a side note here, my comments about this particular family are not a reflection of my experiences with the people of Zambia in general. Not at all. I had been in Zambia for more than 2 months prior to getting to my village, and just about everyone I'd ever met was wonderful, right? So initially, I didn't know what to make of the strange reception I got from my next door neighbors in the village. I was really perplexed by a lot of things they said and did, but for so many reasons, I wanted to give them the benefit of the doubt. But nevertheless, I had concerns from the start, and the quality of my interactions with them were definitely a part of what made my early days in the village as hard as they were. And then, of course, there was the matter of assembling my bicycle. I had never assembled a bike all by myself prior to coming to Zambia. And, putting together a mountain bike by myself was a challenge that I was up for. But what got to me was that this bike and all of its pieces came with a tiny little pamphlet that was the only thing approaching an instruction manual. And, I read this thing backwards and forwards and upside down and, front and back a million times over, and couldn't get my bike put together. And in many places, this little manual of mine said that further instructions pertaining to the specific questions I had could be found in the assembly guide. I did not have the assembly guide that my little manual referred to, and there was nothing I could do about this. This situation drove me repeatedly to tears. But then again, many things during my first week in my new village drove me repeatedly to tears. Now, before you leave for the Peace Corps, you will probably hear, if you ever leave for the Peace Corps, or if you ever have left for the Peace Corps, before you go, you hear all these stories about people leaving as soon as they get there. It's called early terminating when you go home before your service is up. And you hear all these stories about people early terminating, right? And, it's so bad. Some people just can't take it and that kind of stuff. And that is not the right way of putting it, number one. But number two, a couple people in my cohort did that in pretty short order. I think one person left during pre-service training and one person left pretty much as soon as she got to her village. And so I knew that wanting to leave was a thing, right? And in addition to that, Peace Corps staff were pretty good about acknowledging the challenges of Peace Corps service and letting us know that we should anticipate difficult experiences in addition to anticipating wonderful experience. So the point is that I understood prior to getting to my village that things could get really hard. And that for some people, things get so hard that they decide they just want to get out of Dodge and quit the whole business. And knowing that could happen for me was helpful preparation. And of course, I'd had a few tough days during pre-service training when my mood was pretty fucking low. So I'd certainly had a taste of what the Peace Corps blues could feel like. But nothing could have prepared me for that first week alone in my village. During that week, pretty much every single moment was excruciatingly hard. Pretty much every other second, I thought to myself, okay, I totally get it. I totally understand why people leave. I understand why people get on their bike, ride to the nearest town without saying goodbye to anyone in their new village, find a phone, call the Peace Corps staff, and tell someone to come pick them up right away because they want to go home and quit. But of course, I didn't have that option because I couldn't put my goddamn bike together. That isn't the point, though. And eventually I did get my bike put together. The point that I want to stress is that during that first week in my village, even though I knew I was not going to go home, even though I knew I was going to hang in there, and even though I believed that if I hung in there, it would be worth it, there were also moments when I was like, I completely understand the appeal of quitting right now. This totally sucks. In terms of challenging emotional experiences, I have never experienced anything quite like that first week in my village in Zambia before or since. That's not to say that it was like the worst experience of my life or anything like that. It was just uniquely difficult. And so here's what I did during that uniquely difficult week. I said to myself very deliberately and very frequently, okay, Marie, this is fucking hard right now. This is so hard for me right now. I knew this was possibly going to be very hard, and it is way more difficult than I imagined it could possibly be. And this is so crazy, and I am totally struggling. And I know that this is part of what people experience in the Peace Corps. And now I understand why some people choose to leave. I get it. Now I have that piece of understanding. And I'm not going to leave, but I am going to go inside my mud hut right now and let myself cry for 10 minutes because there is literally nothing else that I can do right now. And then I will pull myself together. I will go back out into the world and I will face the next part of my day the best that I can. And that's what I did over and over again for many days in a row. That first week in the village was by far the hardest, but even after the intensity of the difficulty faded a little, things didn't get amazingly better right away. Things with my neighbors, my would have been host family, got worse, actually. And figuring out what to do about that situation was quite a challenge. Since I wasn't yet all that well acquainted with anyone else in the area, I didn't want to speak badly about my new neighbors. I didn't want to offend anyone. I was supposed to be making a good impression on my new community and forging bonds, not stirring up trouble. But eventually a lot of things happened. But one of the things that happened was that I learned that my neighbors weren't all that well regarded by many people in the area. And I ended up moving to a totally different part of the village. And my new neighbors were wonderful. And getting out of my original village house and away from my original village neighbors ended up being a tremendous relief. But getting all of that stuff sorted out took weeks. And advocating for myself and making this change took a lot of courage and tenacity and a lot of willingness to be really uncomfortable in speaking up for myself. And mind you, throughout all this time, I didn't have contact with other Peace Corps volunteers. I didn't have that provincial house nearby that some other volunteers had that I could bike to. I didn't have other volunteers in biking distance of me. I had finally been able to set up a post office box in the nearest town, but I had to send people back home mail in order for them to get my address. And so it would take time for them to get my letters. And then if they wrote me back, it took time for me to get their responses. And it wasn't like I was in town to pick up my mail every day anyway. I didn't have access to the internet to check email. I think I found a phone that I could use in town during this time. And I was able to call my parents like once during this period, but that was it. So, in other words, during this really challenging period, I didn't have anyone I could lean on for support. I eventually made good friends in my village, but at first, the whole dynamic with my strange neighbors, was difficult in and of itself, but it also had a limiting impact on my ability to form relationships with other people in the village. So for this really, tough period of time, I was about as alone as I had ever been, right? So if you've been listening to this podcast for a while, you've probably heard me talk about tolerating discomfort. And in case it doesn't go without saying, in those early days and weeks in my village in Zambia, I was tolerating a lot of discomfort. And let me remind you that I had left behind a life that I loved, that I was very, like awash in good feelings in, for the privilege of being so uncomfortable there in my village in Zambia. So why didn't I just pack it up and go back home to my nice life? Well, here's why. I knew why I wanted to be in Zambia. I knew what I wanted to get out of the experience of being in Zambia and serving in the Peace Corps and living in Southern Africa. And I reminded myself of those things every day. And I am not kidding about that. In those difficult early weeks, I had to sit myself down once a day and sometimes more than once a day and write about why I was there and why I wanted to be there and what I wanted to experience in my Peace Corps service. I also had to consciously and deliberately and repeatedly remind myself that the discomfort I was experiencing was not going to last forever. I had to choose to trust that things could and would change. And I had to choose to believe that I could handle what I was experiencing, even when it was really difficult. And if you hear my voice shaking now, it's because thinking about this, like I remember being in my mud hut and being like, this is fucking hard, right? So I had to make these choices over and over and over again. I had to be really deliberate about telling myself, I can handle this and I'm choosing to handle this for a reason. It was not like I told myself once, like, this is okay. All the discomfort's going to be worth it. You can hang in there. And then everything was fine. Not at all. I had to renew these commitments to myself and to my beliefs many times a day, every single day. And then, of course, as I've said already, things did start to change, or perhaps more accurately, I began to figure out how to make things change. And I eventually moved to a different part of my village. And that was a totally different experience. And that was like a sea change in my experience of village life, right? And in addition to that, my Peace Corps experience included so much more than living in the village. It included having the opportunity to hitchhike to Mozambique and to swim in Lake Malawi, to slide down sand dunes in Namibia and to drink wine in South Africa. And eventually I moved out of my village to live in Lusaka, the capital of Zambia. And that was a whole other adventure too, right? And although there were certainly other difficult moments in the overall experience of my Peace Corps service, those initial weeks in my village were uniquely challenging. And if I hadn't been willing to stick it out through those supremely difficult moments, I wouldn't have gotten to experience all of the amazing things that I wanted to experience. I wouldn't have gotten to enjoy all of the things that I wanted to enjoy in Africa that I trusted were available to me if I were to hang in there. All right. There are several generalizable points I want to make about what I've just shared with you. The first is that sometimes we think about options we have in life in terms of wrong decisions and right decisions, right? But what if there's no such thing as a wrong decision or a right decision? What if the real question is, what do we most want to experience in life, right? I posed that one to you earlier. And what are you willing to do in order to have those experiences? What are we willing to give up in order to have the experiences we most want to have? How much discomfort are we willing to tolerate in order to ultimately get more of what we want? Sometimes, in order to get what we really want, we have to give up some things we really appreciate. And sometimes getting more of what we want requires us to weather some discomfort and hang in there through some really tough going in order to realize our dreams or have our wishes come true or to meet our goals, right? And sometimes, the course of navigating these challenges is something that we can predict, but sometimes it isn't. Sometimes we have to be willing to step into the unknown and be willing to not be able to imagine the challenges we might encounter in order to ultimately experience the things we want to experience. So to make this a little more concrete, even in relation to marriages and relationships and infidelity, that is, even if you're sure you want to have options open to you in your life that will only be open to you if you leave your marriage, you may still be extremely discombobulated after your separation or your divorce if you decide to separate or divorce. Even if you're sure you don't want to live with your spouse anymore, you may still be profoundly lonely if you move out and then it's just you and your new apartment. Even if you are sure that you want to pursue a life with your affair partner, you may still have moments of feeling very sad about ending your marriage if you go through with ending your marriage and pursuing a life with your affair partner. Even if you're sure that you want to build a life for yourself outside of the context of your marriage, the early stages of creating that life for yourself without your spouse around may challenge you in ways you never imagined possible. And what if none of that is bad? What if none of that is a problem? What if we could anticipate that all of these sorts of things might happen or might not happen, and believe that it's possible for us to experience these kinds of challenges with good humor, or at least willingness rather than resistance? What if we didn't anticipate challenges or discomfort as reasons to avoid particular choices, but as a necessary part of living life to the fullest? I'll say that a little bit differently. What if we looked at anticipated challenges or discomfort not as reasons not to do something, but simply as part and parcel of getting to do things? What if we trusted that if we can get really clear on what we want, we can have it, as long as we are willing to experience some discomfort in the process? Now, you may be listening to this and thinking, okay, all that sounds great, but I'm not really clear on what I want. And that's fair enough. But the question of how you get clear on what you really want is another question for another day. That's a whole nother podcast episode that we'll have to talk about another time. But that is certainly something that we can explore together. So if you would like my help clarifying what you really want, you can schedule an introductory coaching session with me through my website, mariemurphyphd.com. And of course, I'm available to help you with all other infidelity related challenges too. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, I would love it if you would go to iTunes to rate and review the show. And I wish you a great week. I'll talk to you next time. Bye for now.
Thanks for listening to Your Secret is Safe with Me with Dr. Marie Murphy. Make sure to click subscribe to get updates on our latest episodes.